The hosts feel it would be a little unkind to present this podcast without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to. Well, we've warned you. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Frankencast. I'm the mad scientist, Anthony Bowman. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joined as always by...
the oddly childlike monster that is Eric Velazquez. My pronouns are also he, him.
All right, so yeah, this week we're not talking about a movie. We're not talking about any specific movie, I guess I should say.
Right.
We're just going to be talking about what has drawn us to the Frankenstein story, specifically what has drawn us, the two of us here on the podcast, but I think also, generally what draws us as like a community of fans of monsters and horror, why we keep coming back to this story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of curious. So I don't know if a lot of the listeners know this, but I have kind of been wanting this podcast to exist for years. I always check iTunes and I'm like, I just want a podcast about Frankenstein. I just want to listen to it, and it's just never been there. And I'm finally, it's the be the change you want to see in the world kind of deal. And I was like, if nobody's going to make this for me to listen to, I'm going to have to make it.
Make it myself.
Yeah. And so I started kind of reaching out, does anybody I know want to do this with me? And you were the first and really only person to jump. You were like, yes, I want to do this. And I was so excited. It's I didn't really know much about your love for Frankenstein. And it was this is going to be a great opportunity to talk about these movies with someone I have not gotten to talk to about them before. Right. So it's been a lot of fun, but I'm really curious, what draws you to Frankenstein?
So, I've always been into horror movies, right? A lot of times people, whenever I'm just talking about it, I will say I was kind of raised by Freddy and Jason. As a kid, I watched all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Probably shouldn't have been doing that, but it's just, I've gravitated towards that. I've watched most of all the Freddy's Nightmares television show, Tales from the Crypt, things like that. So I've always, liked the, I've liked horror. I've just been into horror all my life, right?
Yeah.
Now, being a child of the 80s, kind of the 80s. I'm technically an elder millennial. But it's so Frankenstein was kind of a mascot at that point, right?
Yeah.
We had Frankenberry. We've had the Monster Squad, and then eventually it would be Monsters in My Pocket. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Toy line?
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, so it was literally a Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein that fit in your pocket, and those were the toys, and that's the kind of stuff I always gravitated towards, and I love werewolves. American Werewolf in London is probably my number one favorite horror movie of all time. If you held a gun up to my head and asked me right now, but as I mentioned earlier in our previous recordings, Frankenstein is my number two, right?
Yeah.
He hits the same vein for me that Jason Voorhees does, in that, for the most part, he's a force of nature, right? I mean, later Jason movies, he would become this extremely malevolent monster, but in the early stuff, he was just kind of a child that was wronged in his own, but he's in a giant man's body.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that the Frankenstein monster or Frank or Adam or what have you kind of filled in my... Yeah, I mean, how many different names does everyone apply to him, right?
Oh, yeah, he's had tons over the years.
Yeah. And if you're a big fan of Darkstalkers, which is another thing that I really miss and wish would come back, there was Victor.
Oh, okay.
He was basically the Frankenstein monster, just in a fighting game, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so those are kind of where I draw my inspirations from, and, you know, just the kind of wheelhouse that I like to live in. Also, as I think I mentioned in the War of the Gargantuas, like, that was one of the first movies I had ever seen. You know, and that's one of the kaiju movies that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that movie, even if I rag on it really hard.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you gotta pick on the things you love. And, you know, once you've watched it a million times, of course, you're gonna find the flaws, but you keep watching it, so, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like, later on, that would eventually, you know, I've always been into role-playing. Well, ever since I was in high school, I was into role-playing games. So, and, you know, D&D, the golems are a big thing. Then there was World of Darkness, which is Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse. And, you know, I got into that pretty heavy with a couple friends of mine. But then later on, there would be a game called Promethean, which was literally about different forms of, like, undead, risen individuals, and Frankenstein monsters were one of the subgroups.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, yes, please let me play as a Frankenstein monster. And, you know, and it has a really cool story, but that I may talk about in the future. I keep telling Anthony I'm going to do that, and maybe one day I will.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's, you know, I know that I kind of rattled everything off like a shotgun there, Anthony, but, you know, what about you? Like, what specifically brings you into the Frankenstein sphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had similar kind of, like, I think I started more into monster movies, and, like, only in more recent years as I got older did I get into, like, horror. Like, I'm also very much into slasher movies, and Jason is one of my favorites as well. But when I was younger, I was kind of a scared kid, and so, like, I liked monsters because they were, I don't know, they were like a sort of safer version of scary stuff, you know?
Right. Yeah.
They weren't quite as, like, terrifying as, like, Freddy, who's gonna, like, you know, slice you open or whatever. It's just like it's a monster. Like, it's not normal. It's a little creepy, but, like, you kind of still feel safe. And I don't know, I think Frankenstein especially, because, you know, like we were just talking about, like, Frankenstein is just a big kid. And so if you are a kid, you have that connection.
Gravitate, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, obviously Monster Squad, you said, like, you know, that's a really good example where you have the little girl who does sort of, like, form a bond with the Frankenstein monster, and that kind of carries through the movie. And, like, you know, I watched that and I was just like, I want to be that little girl. I just want to, like, you know, pal around with Frankenstein. Like, it's just, it's the dream. And I think also, you know, I think if you're, like, kind of a weird kid that kind of maybe doesn't fit in a little bit, there's something about seeing these, you know, especially Frankenstein again, like, seeing his struggle with, like, people don't like him. He's not doing anything, you know, to deserve their hatred, but, like, he's just not fitting in. And, you know, when you don't fit in, there's definitely something where it's like, well, you know, he's the hero, like, his, you know, his name's on the VHS, because, you know, like, it says Frankenstein, and he's the main character, but, like, you know, people don't like him, and, you know, that's okay, I guess. And, like, I think there's definitely something kind of comforting about, you know, about seeing something like that, seeing something that is, you know, that's really cool. Like, it's this iconic thing that is famous for not being appreciated, and you know, it's sort of comforting.
Yeah, it's kind of like found family to a degree. You know, it's, you see a little bit of yourself in these things, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why, yeah, like, you know, like last week we did the little commercial, and it's like that's why that thing just really, like, hit me so hard. Is just like, here's this, you know, he finally, like, gets a win, and you know, it feels like we're getting the win right there along with him, you know. It
really does. Yeah, I definitely agree with that 100%. I wouldn't necessarily say I was probably more of a lonely kid. Maybe by that degree, I was kind of like an outsider. So I definitely felt like, you know, like you said, going toward towards those things kind of gave me a sense of comfort and friendship, and even if they weren't actual friends. But yeah, that's fair. That's very fair.
And I think, the like beyond that, there's also, I mean, I think this is something that draws everyone into, Frankenstein is sort of like the story of man's relationship to his creator, like, and I think whether that creator is God or your parents or your family or whatever, I think, if you there's one thing about feeling like you're an outcast at school or whatever, but also, if you've got, if you're having like a contentious relationship with your sort of existence in the world and why you exist and why you suffer and all that, like whatever that is for you, if you're like, born with a handicap or born just, if you're, gay and you're, people tell you that you're wrong, that you shouldn't be gay, and it's like, but I'm created this way. Like
right.
this is the way that, I was made, and there's something wrong with that. And like, so there's definitely something where it's just like, you see the creature who is just, he just wakes up and is suddenly, punished for existing. And
he never has to be there or anything like that. It's just, he was forced to be here by Victor Frankenstein or in our case, Henry and his subsequent, descendants. But yeah, like you said, he just wanted to live his life in the way he saw fit, or at least have some sort of life other than just being beaten by Fritz or, whoever else is around, lending to the abuse. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and I think that definitely was something that, like, when I was young, I didn't even realize that was something that was kind of drawing me to it. Like, to get like a little bit more personal, I guess, like, I grew up in a very religious home, and like when I was young, like I kind of went along because it was just, what we did and everything. But like as I got older, I started to have doubts and stuff. But even when I was younger, I never quite fit in with the rest of my family, like, to coin that, or to like borrow the joke from the lesson, like I was the sort of like black sheep of my family,
right?
And like my parents were great, like they weren't like abusive or anything, like I had a healthy family life for the most part, but I definitely didn't fit. Like I was definitely like the kind of kid that, like, if someone was like, "Oh, you're adopted," I'd be like, "Oh, okay, that makes so much sense." But I wasn't. It just happens, I didn't fit in. So like as I got older, I think feeling that sort of distance from like this concept of like God or whatever that I'd been taught my whole life, like this is the truth, this is reality, and then being like, I don't feel like I'm not getting that response. Like I don't, everybody's saying they pray and God's telling them stuff, and I'm not getting that back. Like I feel like I'm just talking into an echo chamber, and so like, does God not want me, or I think it took a lot of years to like get through all of that, but I think that Frankenstein was sort of something that was like a source of comfort, that he also had this contentious relationship with his creator, right. and when you have like a God that you can't necessarily see or like know is real, there's something nice to be like, even in this case where you've got Frankenstein the monster and Frankenstein the doctor, they're both real, tangible people that are interacting with one another, and like it's still not working, right. So that's not the problem, that I can't see God, like there could be some other problem, and like every relationship has room to be, broken in some way, I guess. Right. And like as we watch all these movies and see the creature reach out and find little connections here and there, like it's like, just because this relationship doesn't work doesn't mean that you're like doomed to be alone, like
right.
You can find your hermit in the woods, you can find your Igor, you can find the people that fit with what you need, and that, like whether it's Igor who's also an outcast, or the blind man who's not judgmental because he can't see, whatever it is, like, there are ways that you can make connections with people no matter what your reason for being an outcast is, I guess.
Yeah, right. But also I think it does also harken back to kind of the idea of there are so many different ways that relationships can be bad, right? So you have the bad parental relationship that the monster has with Frankenstein. You have the kind of abusive relationship to a degree, or manipulative relationship, that Igor and the monster share. You do have just the nice, mutually symbiotic relationship between the hermit and the monster. And I think with the healthiest relationship in this and everything we've seen so far, probably be between the monster and Dr. Bowman and the other kaiju Frankenstein family members.
Yeah, I think in that movie, there's like the one doctor who's like a little bit more leaning towards experiments than like caring, but yeah, the other two doctors sort of just kind of meet him on his own terms, and like, they're teaching him things, they're, trying to care for him, trying to find a place that he fits,
Right.
Whether that's like, we need to move him to a larger room because he's growing or whatever. I think, in a perfect world, like, that situation could have like been able to continue to develop, and they would have grown together, like, emotionally grown, but also, Frankenstein would continue to get larger. But but they could have found a way to make that work if, all the other things hadn't happened.
Right.
If Baragon hadn't, like, tried to destroy the city and, cause him to be framed and all that. And,
or at the very end, if the random octopus didn't just come out of the ocean and fight him.
I mean, all of our lives would be better if we weren't randomly being attacked by a giant octopus.
Some people would argue with you. Some people would say that's an improvement.
Yeah, so I think one of the other things I was thinking about, like, I think that these movies also, I think a lot of horror is about man's relationship to, like, death. Mm-hmm. And it's different ways of approaching that. So you have, like, the vampires that, can live forever, and you kind of see the cost of that and everything. But I think Frankenstein is sort of like the other side, where it's like people trying to find ways to extend life and to, that's what is really happening in real life. We have doctors and scientists studying ways to make us live longer by, curing diseases and, whatever. And I think that all kind of comes from this kind of story, of like finding ways to cheat death or extend life or create life. And I think that's something that brings people to horror in general, but Frankenstein specifically, is that, we're all kind of afraid to die. And so this is like a way to sort of explore the possibility that maybe we don't have to, or to maybe see what might happen if we didn't, like, maybe comfort us and be like, maybe, mortality is a good thing in some ways.
Right. It kind of goes back to the whole thing with the Wolfman, Lon Chaney, Larry Talbot. He has functional immortality, but he has to give that up because every full moon he just turns into a monster, and he's trapped inside his own body for however long it takes, right?
Yeah. It's like you said, I think the big three that we dealt with a lot in the past couple movies, like, are all sort of different variations. Yeah.
So it's like, so, what do you, aside from this being kind of, also the Frankenstein story is just like it's almost biblical to a degree, right? You have the whole Paradise Lost angle where after a certain period, the monster says, you know what? You're not going to meet me on my terms. You're not going to come down to where I am. You know what? It's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So I'm going to make you suffer just as much as you've made me suffer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's also kind of the negative side of all of that. It's like, I want my retribution for what you didn't give me, right? And that also goes back to bad relationships and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's, that's when, like, the monster actually becomes monstrous.
Yeah.
But, like, again, like, we've seen him, I guess, is it Ghost of Frankenstein, where he takes revenge and, like, he does just kill some people because they have hurt him, and, like, that's also just something that, like, is comforting to explore, like, people are unkind to us sometimes, and it hurts, and like you want to lash out,
Right.
but you usually you don't, and even if you do, like it's not to that degree.
Right.
But it's kind of, there is something sort of like escapist about being like watching the monster.
Unless you do it for me, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
In that way, maybe we're a little bit like Igor, huh? Dun,
Oh,
dun,
for
dun.
sure.
No, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that after a certain point when we, see that, we see the effects, and it kind of goes into the whole cycle of violence. Violence begets more violence. So one accident caused by the monster leads to a spiral where the entire town eventually tries to burn him down and kill him. And then, of course, this wasn't in the book or anything like that, but in subsequent movies, he just kept coming back and more murders, and it would get a little crazier each time. But every once in a while, you would have those moments where he's like, I don't, he doesn't say it, obviously. He rarely talks, but there are those times when he kind of stops killing or only kills people that hurt him intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I definitely...
Yeah,
I
it's like, you get to kind of live vicarious through him in the violence.
Yeah.
And then also see why it doesn't work,
Exactly.
So you get kind of like the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And I think, you just mentioned like that he rarely talks. And I was thinking about that, like we talked recently, where he says, yes, master, in Abbott and Costello. And I feel like that's a side of the creature that like we haven't really gotten to dig into much in the movies we've watched so far. But like he does kind of play a subservient role in a lot of adaptations. We keep coming back to Monster Squad, which we will definitely do an episode on eventually.
100%.
But like, Monster Squad kind of carries on from that, where it's like, Dracula is the boss and like kind of bosses Frankenstein around. And I think, specifically in Monster Squad, you kind of get to see where it's like, that's another thing we can all relate to, where like we kind of have to be subservient to our, bosses. We have to go to work and like just do what we're told, right, and everything. And sometimes we don't want to or don't agree with it. And, which is, again, like, it's really nice to see him sort of like escape and like be like, no, I'm just going to like hang out with these kids. They're nice to me. I'm just going to be friends with them, right, and like not go in on your evil plan this time. But yeah, I'm not sure really why, other than I guess he's like of sort of like the main monsters, he would be the one that is most portrayed as being like less intelligent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That maybe that's why he gets placed into a subservient role often. And, just like the stereotype of like, the big guy that's like,
right,
the sidekick or whatever.
Yeah, he's just the tank in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting, because in the book he becomes a very eloquent, very intelligent person on his own. Like, because he's been cast out, he learns all this information. I mean, he runs into some people that help him, but that's something we really haven't seen, and that's kind of a gripe I have with most Conan movies, but we're not going into that. Is that he has the potential for all this knowledge, all these talents, but it's like no one wanted to give him that chance to flex those muscles in the beginning.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of the stuff that I find is very interesting in that.
Yeah, and so that kind of goes back to what we were talking about too, is like the biblical thing you said. So like that's kind of the Adam and Eve story, right? Mm-hmm. They're created and like they're told like, don't
do this.
Don't eat from this tree of knowledge. Like, stay away from that. We don't. I don't want you to have this knowledge. I want you to be simple and
right,
live this sort of like carefree life.
I'm not going to wall off this tree, hide it, or burn it. Just don't touch it. It's wait a second. That seems like a setup. I don't know.
Yeah, and of course, like that's the thing, is like we all want to learn. Like, everybody wants to better themselves and grow and like expand their knowledge base. Whatever they're, like not everybody wants to like go, learn the stuff that they teach you in school. But like, right, I think everybody wants to learn something, whatever interests them, whatever drives them. And, like you said in the book, that's kind of a big thing, is like no one is giving him this knowledge or encouraging him to find it for himself, but he does, like he has this drive to expand his horizons.
Exactly. And I think we all have that, and we all want that, and probably see a little bit of that in the monster and ourselves. And that's another thing that links us, of course. So my question is, like, what do you think the future of the Frankenstein monster would then be?
I think we're going to see more, like, it's going to be more high tech. It's going to be more computer AI kind of stuff. I think something we'll probably end up watching before long is Ex Machina. I think that's kind of like a look at where Frankenstein stories are going, because I think that's where our technology is at this point. Like, we're creating AI, we're creating, computers that are smarter than us. And there's a lot to mine there in terms of like fear, like once, it kind of flips the switch and like makes us as the viewer more relate to the scientists, to the creators, because, what happens if you make a creation that is like better than you, or that can like outpace you in some way.
Right. And that kind of links back to the whole family thing as well, because a lot of parents, to a degree, having children is creating something that, in a sense, you either hope will be better than you or on par. And then, of course, you also have the parents that look at that and like, I really don't want my kid to be that much better than me. I don't want to be obsolete,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely like the balance of like human existence is like, you theoretically want to leave the world a better place than you found it, but like you also like want to be the star of the story. So like you kind of want to be the best thing. And I mean, I definitely think that the Frankenstein story kind of gives you both sides of that as well, where you can like relate to the doctor and the creature and how they both experience the world
and kind of play off each other to that degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like as you're just mentioning, it's like, so in the beginning, we come to believe that Frankenstein himself is kind of the protagonist, right? And that's kind of the goal and everything he fills. But then once the monster's created, well, then that he kind of becomes the protagonist, because his creator was once again abusive and neglectful and didn't take care of him. So we root for him to become better, and which he eventually does. But of course, then he inverts it later on by becoming monstrous to his own creator.
Yeah. So. And I mean, I think that's why this story has endured so long. Is it's very complicated. It you get kind of like all sides of this story where like you relate to different characters at different points, and so it's like even when someone's being villainous, whether that's the doctor or the monster, you've had the positive experience with them as well. So you. And I mean, I think that's something that it's instructive for all of us, because we all make mistakes. We're all villainous at some point, and so if you read this story and you get attached to these characters and you can kind of forgive them when they do wrong, then like hopefully you can carry that into your own life and say like when these people that I care about hurt me, like maybe I can forgive them, like I can relate to their story and their experience and see where they're coming from and why this might have happened, and like we can work through it and move forward. And I mean, I think again, like we were talking about last week, like that's kind of what that little short story is about, is just finding common ground with people and finding a way to move forward together.
Yeah, so would you say that the Frankenstein story is a very human story about monsters, or a very monstrous story about people?
I think the first one. I mean, I think you could definitely interpret it either way, but I think the way that I look at it is, it's a very human story about monsters.
Exactly.
It's a way to give you monsters and like humanize them and like let you experience that, I guess. Right. And like it humanizes, everybody deserves to be humanized, I guess. And I think that's kind of what it does for us.
Right. And yeah, as you said, like the Frankenstein monster, whether he wanted to, whether it was intentional or not, has become the hero to a degree for the outsider. for, you know, there maybe hopefully in the future we'll see more like, you know, NB kind non-binary related Frankenstein stories, maybe a few more gay stories, even though I completely contend that the second, third, and I think fourth were definitely, or the third and fourth were definitely about a gay couple.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah. And, you know, maybe obviously we have a trans Frankenstein story. I don't know how that would turn out. Hopefully it would be, you know, good. Just more inclusive Frankenstein is what I'm saying for everybody.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, you know, I mean, like, you know, the Frankenstein story is all about like changing bodies and taking control of. So there's definitely room for an amazing like trans Frankenstein story. And yeah, I mean, if I ever come across that, like we will definitely be covering that. I would be very fascinated to
note to self, write script.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about, you know, that I wanted this podcast to exist, so I had to make it. So maybe that's what we're gonna have to do.
Fair enough.
All right. So, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Oh man, I tell you what, I will probably remember some things here in about 2 hours because that's how my brain works. But I mean, you know, I feel like we've let the listeners in on ourselves a little bit. I mean, they're going to get to know us hopefully for years to come, but you know, definitely in the upcoming year. Yeah,
and I think that a lot of this we will discuss these little points in further detail as they come up in the various movies we watch. But I just thought it would be kind of fun to kind of like sit down and say like, why Frankenstein? Why are we here? A few people that have listened had said they were kind of curious about like what drew us in. So I thought that would be kind of fun to share and a nice little kind of palate cleanser before we get into the next big series, which I guess I should say, we finished Universal and kind of took some time with some smaller little, runs of movies. And I think we're ready. We're going to dig into the other big sort of pillar of, Frankenstein cinema.
It's hammer time, baby!
Yeah.
Sorry for stealing that out from under you, but I had to.
No, that was perfect. So, yes, we will be doing the Hammer movies. I believe there's 7 of those, so that'll be the next, couple of weeks. We'll be starting with The Curse of Frankenstein, I believe, is the first one.
Yeah. Yep.
So we'll be doing that next week, and then what we've got ahead for the next 6 weeks after that.
Yeah. So definitely excited. Well, I guess this has been a wild year, so it's dragging down.
It has been, and so if you're listening to this when it comes out, this is New Year's Eve, so Happy New Year to everyone, and we'll see you with Hammer Horror in the new year.
Yep, Happy New Year. And I guess the only other thing to say is to be continued.
Looks like you survived another episode. The Frankencast is a production of FCR Media. It's hosted by Anthony Bowman and Eric Velazquez. Follow us on Twitter at The Frankencast, or send us a letter at thefrankencast@gmail.com. Our cover art is by Amanda Keller. You can find her at Keller Illustrations on Instagram. Our theme music is by Vivek Abhishek. Thanks for listening.